Hello there, I'm Ty Carter, and today I'll be taking you on a virtual tour of the Tuscaloosa Museum of Art, home of the Westervelt collection. Let's get started. The Tuscaloosa Museum of Art is located just off Jack Warner Parkway here in Tuscaloosa, and was designed by the architect Mr. Cecil Alexander. As you can see here, Mr. Alexander designed a very beautiful exterior to the building, which resembles that of Eastern Asian architecture. Moreover, the museum's mission statement is that it is the motivation and inspiration of the Tuscaloosa Museum of Art to foster a sense of community while promoting and disseminating an understanding of fine and decorative arts. This, in my opinion, is open for interpretation as we walk throughout the museum. For example, our first stop on this virtual tour takes a look at works that are all about the colonial and revolutionary time in America. As you can see here, there are many works that depict George Washington. Obviously, you can see how this would foster a sense of community for us as Americans, but I would like to take it in a different direction. As I'm sure you know, Tuscaloosa was once home to a great Native American land. In fact, we get our name from Chief Tuscaloosa. Native Americans make up a lot of our very rich history in this community, so it makes a lot of sense as to why they're represented so abundantly in the Tuscaloosa Museum of Art. Now, even though works such as Indians on the Prairie by Carl Wilmer or Custer's Last Stand by Gail Porter Hoskins don't really represent Indians and Native Americans from our neck of the woods, they're still a very good reminder of our shared history in this community. Now, moving on, we can get an even clearer sense of our shared history. First, let's take a look at the bust of Robert E. Lee done by Edward Valentine. Now, Robert E. Lee was the general of the Confederate Army during the Civil War, and obviously Alabama was a part of the Confederacy during that time. Now, whether you're proud of our history or not, this does remind us that we have a shared history, being part of the Confederacy, for all of us in Tuscaloosa, and for a broader sense, all of us in Alabama. The same goes for Stonewall Jackson. The picture of Stonewall Jackson is that it's hanging directly next to the bust of General Lee. Stonewall Jackson was one of the most famous soldiers for the Confederacy during the Civil War, as he was built like a stone wall. Moreover, the museum also has this little Civil War era drum that drummer boys would use during the Civil War. And during my research for this museum, I did find out that drummer boys were used to give out orders and commands to the soldiers during battle because they could not always hear their generals. So I thought that was pretty interesting to add to our presentation here. And all of these, as you can kind of see, they're all about the Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson. They're about the Confederacy, and they're about the South, which is really kind of the target audience for this museum, to foster this sense of community for all of us here in the South. And now, as we're finishing up, I would like to direct your attention to this bust of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This bust is one of the few artifacts I was able to find that was representative of the Civil Rights era in the United States, which was a very big deal, particularly in the South and particularly in Alabama. Of course, we had the March in Selma. And this just follows the narrative that I've been talking about the entire time of the mission statement, which is to foster a sense of community for everyone who's visited this museum. As we started off with a very broad sense of community with the colonial pieces. In this sense, the community was all of America. But I took it in a more in-depth sense. I looked at the Native Americans, that represented Tuscaloosa and our rich history in Tuscaloosa, and looked at the Civil War era artifacts that remind us of the South and the South's heritage, whether you're proud of it or not. And moving on to Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement, which was so very important in the South. And I just wanted to add these last few pieces representative of Native Americans, just because they were so prevalent and so abundant in this museum and it makes sense to me because it's the most closely defined, the most well-defined sense of community, because we get our name from our Native American ancestors here in Tuscaloosa. And obviously this is up for interpretation. You could go through this museum and get an entirely different idea of what the mission statement really means to you. But for me, it goes from a broad sense to a very narrow sense. It starts off with the colonial America, and it trickles all the way down to our Tuscaloosa roots. And now, lastly, I'd like to show my bibliography, where I was able to get all of my information from. Now, I've got a majority of my information from visiting the museum and the nice artifacts and the exhibits, and all of the artwork in this museum was just an interpretation of history, the artist's own interpretation of history. And like I say, they are really well done, and they are really interesting. And I would really, really recommend that anyone who lives in the Tuscaloosa area go visit, because it's definitely worth your time. Thank you very much.